Here we go.
All right.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to a delayed Brony Debates live stream tonight. I hope you're all doing well and having a good start to your weekend. We are delayed because my internet router stopped working. So I need to go down to the store tomorrow and get another one. In the meantime, we are running off of Wi-Fi because the modem still works. Hopefully, the stream holds up over Wi-Fi. That's given me trouble in the past, but we're gonna try to have a good night tonight. We're gonna tackle this apparently cursed topic of is friendship is magic anime. This was suggested to us by a friend of the show, Zeus Pegasus. He's been on a few times. Our good friend who helped with my little investigations. And we're good friends with him in real life here. And
you had to try so hard to not say his real name.
Yeah,
I saw that.
Yeah, thanks for calling me out.
No problem. I saw you telling, but it almost popped out.
Yeah, we don't have real names here. The government can't find us like this as long as we stay on the internet.
Exactly.
Anyway, so anyway, thank you, Zeus, for the topic suggestion tonight, and to help me with this. I brought along two people that I know that have seen the most anime, and that would be, you just heard him, Mr. Cordero. How are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing fantastic.
That's good. I'm glad you're doing good. We also got our good friend Chucklyfun returning. He's seen a lot of anime. How are you doing tonight, Chuckly?
Hey, I'm looking really forward to this. I've definitely seen a lot of anime, but even more importantly than that, I like talking about them. I like discussing them. I like critiquing them. Mm-hmm. And I think we're going to do a lot of that tonight. And I like comparing different anime and different shows together.
Nice. And we've got DJ Skywalker, who probably knows as much or maybe just a little bit more about anime than I do. How are you doing tonight, DJ?
I'm doing all right. Tonight, everyone's going to be a weeb.
Well, speak for yourself.
Or the opposite.
Yeah, we got some chat we got to tackle right away real quick here. Trent Girone says, my body and new shirt are ready. He's saying that because he just got himself a Brony Buck, a Buck to the Face t-shirt. Link in the description to the TeePublic. That's hopefully that's the first and only time I do that live on air. And Dulcet Tone says, are we really tackling this topic? And yes, we are. After I sell out some more and give a shout out to my very generous patrons who make my content creation easier, especially those on the $10 and up tier, including Mr. DJ Skywalker and Mr. Cordero joining us tonight, as well as Princess Heather Blossom, Shady Oak Ministries, Sid McConroy, Autoknight, Emerald Spencer, Sodden, Girder, Senko, Cal Christensen, Stephen A. Wilson, Rein-Kun, Princess Sunshine Sparkle, QFlash, and Dark Malcontent, author of the Metaverse series. Please check out everyone's links in the description. If you want to get on the show, I'd love to have you. Patreon, $1 a month, gets you all of that fun stuff. Now then, here's the thing. The reason why this was suggested is because there's people out there that will say things like, well, if it was anime inspired, or if it shares tropes with anime, or then it is technically anime. So
There's a lot of wrong people out there.
Yeah,
let me tell you.
I've known people that say Code Lyoko was an anime. I've met people that say Avatar: The Last Airbender is an anime. So the question we're gonna ask tonight is Friendship is Magic anime? Let's just go down the line here and see what we've got. Chuckly, is Friendship is Magic anime?
No, it's not.
All right, why not?
The anime community for years has been getting these questions asked of it. Like, everybody's promoting their new show and claiming it's an anime. And from the beginning, or from very early on, anime fans were upset at terrible American shows claiming to be anime. Now, they've gotten better over time, a lot better, but eventually, or early on, the anime fans were like, no, that's not anime. To be anime, it has to be made in Japan.
Okay,
And
so you're a gatekeeping retard. Let's let's move on here. Just hold on to that.
Well, thanks for coming to the debate tonight, guys. This has been settled.
Yeah.
This whole
Brony's trying to cancel himself here against the anime community.
Follow him on Patreon.
Cordero, is friendship is magic in anime?
Absolutely freaking not. It's not even close. Like, and even to say it's anime inspired, that's like saying any cartoon is anime inspired. Anime changed the face of the face of animation. Like a tons of, that's like saying something is Disney inspired 20, 30 years ago. Like when something comes around and makes a fundamental change to the way people look at animation, then everything is Disney inspired. That'd be like saying, oh, this Don Bluth cartoon, anything Don Bluth is anime because, you know, is Disney because it's that Disney style. It's like, no, he left Disney. Anastasia is not Disney. If Anastasia is not Disney, you must acquit my client. It's not anime.
All right.
Disney.
And DJ, what do you think? Is friendship is magic an anime?
You know what? It absolutely is.
Tell me why.
I knew somebody was going to.
Tell me
Yay,
why.
somebody we can kill.
Exactly.
Because it's an animation about 6 magical horse girls.
Okay, so what is your definition of anime, DJ?
Apparently cartoon. No, wrong.
All right, we'll get to that part of the discussion.
Okay, so here's the thing. So anime, when you get right down to it, is just the Japanese way of saying an American word animation or an English word animation, because they probably didn't have an English word for it prior to starting it themselves. So that is the commonly accepted theory of how we got the word anime. So with that in mind, Chuckly, does that mean that all animation is anime, or does that mean that it needs to be from Japan because anime is the Japanese word for animation?
So we have this concept with other things that aren't anime, where a word will come over from another culture and we'll use it here, but it will change its meaning as it comes. A lot of people here, you go to a Starbucks, you can buy a chai tea, and you're expecting to get a very specific flavor. A chai latte, it's going to have spices in it, it's going to have a little bit of milk, and it's going to have like cardamom and cinnamon, and it's going to be a black tea. And chai tea comes from India, and in India, chai just means tea. They don't even need to say chai tea, it's just tea. Or when it comes to America, we think of Indian style tea. And that type of tea that I just described is very unique to India, so we call chai tea over here the Indian style tea. But if you go to India and you say chai, you're just asking for tea. Yeah. What's important here is the context. If you're in America and you're talking to anime fans and you're talking about anime, nobody is thinking about all of animation. We use it in the context, we have our own vocabulary, and there's a lot of other words that come over from Japan that work kind of the same way, where the anime community uses them differently. In some cases, anime fans say that they're embarrassing themselves, but whatever, you have to consider the context. In other cases, you actually have words which came over separately, and they will sound similarly to something in another language, but they won't have the same origin, and those will be completely different, even though they sound the same, but you argue that they're the same word. And no, they're not. Things change when they move across cultures, and that's important to take into account.
Alrighty then. DJ, what do you think about what he just said? Crickets.
Well, he's not exactly wrong, but I mean,
so how does
the
that
word anime is still just generic animation, so it may refer to Japanese style in the West, but it's still just animation.
No, it's a proper term. It's a proper, even without the language barrier or the translation. When you make a proper term, the definition of the proper term is not the root words that make up the proper term's base definition. Like that's the whole thing. Like oh, it's just Japanese animation because that's what the root of those two words mean. That would be like oh gosh, what would be an example? That would be like saying submarine. What is a submarine? Well, if it's below the ocean, it's sub, and it's in a marina, so I guess fish or submarine, because that's what those two base words mean. No, that's not how that works. It's a proper word that's been formed. And anime has been specifically it's become a proper noun to mean animation that was originated in Japan and also Korea and arguably China.
Well, you see, that would
I'm going to read right off the Wikipedia page here for a second.
Okay.
It says, in Japan and in Japanese, anime, a term derived from the English word animation, describes all animated works regardless of style or origin.
You just made your own argument for us. You said in Japan. We're not in Japan. We're in Brony's podcast right here talking with anime fans.
But it says regardless of style or origin.
Yes. You made your
Japan.
argument.
Within
you
the
said in
context
Japan.
of Japan.
Yeah, so?
We're not in Japan. We're not talking to Japanese
Correct.
people.
My Little Pony is in Japan.
So
Regardless, exactly.
It
So
does
it's not
air in
anime.
Japan.
Regardless of
No.
style or origin, it's talking about genre and type. That's what it means. It's still within the context of Japan.
So if we go by that logic, DJ, then the fish that swallowed Jonah in the Old Testament is technically a submarine. And that's the sound of Cordero's head hitting the desk.
Yes.
I think, yeah.
I'm gonna go drink some vodka and call it whiskey because it's grain alcohol. All grain alcohol is whiskey.
So how
I'm
much?
sure.
Here's a question for you guys. How much does it matter when there's crossover? So we've got okay. So by the same type of nomenclature, we could even apply it to Japanese things. Take a katana, for example. Okay, all swords are not katana, but all katana are swords. So how much does that apply to the concept of if we're trying to define something like friendship is magic as an anime?
Well, yeah, you're on the right track. Like all anime are cartoons or animation, but not all cartoons and animation are anime.
So I made a point earlier that this was about the evolution of a genre.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, we might have allowed a Western animation into our term of anime, but the old fans decided not to allow it and to use separate terms. And that happens all the time in the development of different terms for genres.
That's also called etymology. Remember when I was saying that it formed a proper noun and that's now the definition? That's literally etymology. That's the history of the evolution of the term. And the term anime evolved to mean it comes specifically from Japan. So to argue that anime could be anything not made in Japan, you're basically saying that the etymology of the word is invalid and didn't happen.
So let me bring up another example of something else that came from Japan, which evolved differently. JRPGs, aka Japanese RPGs, came over to the US, and there are American-made Japanese RPGs that are allowed in the genre, and that genre term evolved differently than anime did, because the American-made Japanese RPGs weren't trying to take over the genre like the American animation was. They just kind of wanted to be their own thing, kind of a very small thing within the genre, and the fans were okay with it. They weren't taking over the discussion, they weren't taking over the genre. So that term evolved differently. So we're not talking about something specific to nationalities here. What we're talking about is what Anthony called etymology, the evolution of terms and the evolution of the genre, and things can evolve differently.
Here's another. Oh, sorry. I'll finish.
We're having a similar issue with RPGs in general, where RPG mechanics in video games have spread into almost every video game out there. But they're not all RPGs. What happened is that we had to split up the term. So now we've got action RPGs, and we've got games with RPG mechanics, and we've got a couple other styles, and they've all influenced each other, but we have to develop different etymology and different terms so that we don't get too much confusion and so that we can have actual good discussion.
All right.
Yeah, exactly. And another example of that exact same thing happening in the alcohol world, specifically the whiskey world. You have the same thing. is what qualifies. There's specific definitions in etymology and history behind what qualifies as whiskey, what qualifies as scotch, what qualifies as bourbon, and all of these different types of things. Like bourbon is a style of whiskey that was founded in Bourbon County, Kentucky. And for a while, it was starting to develop that all whiskey had to be, all bourbon to be called bourbon would have to be made in Bourbon County, Kentucky. But that ended up loosening over time. And now as long as you stick to the bourbon style of distilling whiskey, you can call it a bourbon as long as you match up with the style. Scotch, however, did not loosen that. Scotch has to be made in Scotland, or else it's not Scotch. In fact, they are so strict about Scotch having to be made in Scotland that if you export Scotch from Scotland, you can't even call it Scotch unless you export it in barrels. If you bottle it, or excuse me, I've been out backwards. If you have to bottle it first in order to export it and still call it Scotch. If you export Scotch from Scotland in barrels and then you bottle it yourself in another country, you can't call it Scotch, even though it was literally made in Scotland, because the idea is that you might take those barrels and do something with it. You might finish it in something else. You might do something to the flavor. You might age it in something else. And therefore, you would taint what makes it Scotch in the first place. So just on the idea that somebody might take barrels of Scotch out of Scotland and make it into something else means that you can't even use the term anymore. It has to be bottled in Scotland and made in Scotland and then export it to the rest of the world. Etymology evolves this way, and it gets a lot more nitty-gritty and gatekeeping and specific than anime ever did, and Scotch is one of the best examples.
Yeah,
but then you have other stuff like bourbon. Bourbon is like, hey, as long as you make it like the way bourbon is, you can make it anywhere in the world, and it's called bourbon. That etymology changes based on the history of the word, and the history of anime has evolved into it's made in Japan. So there's tons of shows out there that are not just anime inspired; they're downright trying to be anime. There's some like Crunchyroll originals that are made in a Canadian studio, I think, and they're everything in anime. They're everything anime except in name, because they're not made in Japan, because that's the etymology of the word. Honestly, this is all Avatar: The Last Airbender's fault. They made such a great cartoon that was so good and so beloved, and it was so close to anime. It was just a slightly Americanized version of an anime that was made in America, in American studios and Canadian. And also they dabbled with a Korean studio more than just, because a lot of people use Korean studios for extra animations, but they actually did creatively partnered with a Korean studio. So a lot of people try to take that, well, it's so close to anime in style, and a Korean studio worked on it, and the same Korean studio works on a lot of anime, so Avatar: Last Airbender must qualify as anime. And damn it, they started diluting the conversation with that, because it comes just so close, but it's not quite, because it needs to be made in Japan.
Now,
and
in other conversations off air, I've heard you use the same comparison to like alcohol, like you were talking about, and make arguments against that when it came to champagne. That champagne can only be from a certain place in France. So how?
Call me out and catch me.
Yeah, how is that any different from what we're talking about tonight then?
Okay,
Why is it?
So specifically the champagne example. So champagne could only be made in Champagne, France. Not only did it have to be made in France, it had to be made in Champagne, France. To be called that. It's a sparkling white wine. There's tons of sparkling white wines and spumantes in that style. But to be called champagne, to legally put on the label, it had to be made in France, or else France would throw a fit, because it's part of their cultural identity of that specific city. Well, there was, I forget how long ago it was, but there was an epidemic that was killing the grapes in Champagne, France, and in France, the grapes that they used to make the sparkling wine. Mm-hmm. They were dying off, and it looked like Champagne might die forever because that grape was going to be dead. Well, as a last-ditch effort, they shipped a bunch of the good branches or strains of that grape to California. And California saved Champagne from that blight because they started growing those grapes in California. The actual plant from France. And then California, they're like, well, we got a bunch of this, so now they have a ton of it over in California, and California started making their own champagne. France threw a fit at first, being like, hey, you can't call it champagne because it's not made in Champagne, France. And then California was like, well, we have the same plants. And we saved your ass on this thing, so we're going to call it champagne. So California bullied its way into calling it champagne, and it kind of that sort of forced it into relaxing, and even France recognizes California champagne as champagne. So that was a very specific historical incidence that made that happen. So I guess you could argue that etymology can change over time, but you need some kind of significant historical precedent to make that happen.
And so if we go with what DJ was saying here, and DJ, feel free to correct me if I'm putting inaccurate words in your mouth, but then we could say that Avatar: The Last Airbender would, and potentially even Code Lyoko would be that transition. Right around the same time as The Last Airbender and Code Lyoko, we also had Teen Titans. We also had Megas XLR, which was very explicitly taken heavy inspiration from shows like Gundam. DJ, what do you think about everything that Cordero just said?
Put it into words. What he's saying makes sense, but I can't say I fully agree with it because I don't believe the anime community has the right to change the definition.
It's Japan.
Yeah, but it hasn't changed in Japan, though.
So what happens?
Japan agrees.
What happens when Japanese people start calling Friendship is Magic and King of the Hill anime? Because that conversation is happening over there.
All right, now you're making meme leaps.
No, that's fine. What we're arguing here is that we're in the context of anime fans and anime culture, essentially in the West. So if they change,
here's the thing: that's not the question. It doesn't specify the West. It says, "Is it anime?"
Yeah, that's implied.
I'm going to say the Western anime fan community. I'm going to say their opinion don't matter.
They didn't change it. You have it backwards. The Western anime fan community didn't change the etymology. The etymology predates that.
Then why is it only in the West?
Japan agrees. Japan agrees with the definition.
Until they start calling Friendship is Magic anime over there. And they also, and yeah, I said King of the Hill too, and you thought I was memeing. I'm not. I like the,
actually they do like it. They like the Japanese version of King of the Hill, or the translation. I know that's popular over there.
Yes, but the sub versus dub debate still happens over there.
I'm sure
as well.
So you're saying that Japan that's adopting these popular foreign cartoons for them. They're adopting foreign cartoons and calling them anime. Is that what you're saying is happening?
I believe so.
Then that means that Japan is actively changing the etymology. That's what that means.
All right.
No. They're a different culture. So if they're going to adopt them at all, it's possible that they might use other ways to differentiate between Japanese and foreign-produced anime. I can't tell if they're doing that from this discussion, and I haven't been over there. It's entirely possible that they're using other terms surrounding that, or they're using other ways to frame the discussion.
There's also
or maybe they're not.
There's also a translation issue here, because remember, we get anime derived from the Japanese word for animation. So remember, if the Japanese in Japan are calling these cartoons animation, because that's what the word in their language means, they're not calling it anime the proper noun. They're just saying these things are anime. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, they're not changing the definition of anime. It's just, these are cartoons, and their word for cartoon translates to anime to us. So it's not that they're changing the etymology of the word anime as we know it in English. There's just a translation mishap or an easy misunderstanding, because they're just using their own domestic word to describe what it is, a cartoon for them.
So if I went back to my example of chai tea, which is all over the place in America.
Similar thing. They're calling it anime. I like to call it tea.
Yeah, if you go over to India and you were to get some random tea there, they're still going to call it chai. The only place that chai tea matters as a specific flavor of tea is in the West, where we consider chai tea something of a foreign thing, and it's been imported, and it developed that name. So if we're going to talk about chai tea, and we're going to discuss it as a tea, we're not going to be talking about all tea out there like you would in India. Over here, it has a specific meaning. Now, in order to have any useful discussion, you have to agree on your definitions, and you have to be kind of having a common culture. And if I went over to over to India, I'd have to use their terminology to talk about their specific style of tea, but I can just call it chai tea over here.
And that's that means it's not the Western anime fandom just deciding what it is. It's that we in English we came up with a word to describe the animation and cartoons that came from Japan, and we shortened that to anime rather than Japanese animation. You know, or Japanimation. Remember that in like the 80s and 90s where they say that it got shortened to anime to mean cartoons that come from Japan.
Yes.
So that's just the word. That's how that etymology evolved. That's not the opinion of anime fans. That's just how it happened. So back in Japan, when they say anime, whatever animation is, in whatever that word is in Japan, and then we translate that to anime, that's not changing the definition. That you're just going back to the raw base word and misunderstanding that etymology. There was a funny thing that happened to Aaron Hansen from Game Grumps. He went over to Japan, and he knows some Japanese, so he's trying to be all fancy, and blend in with the locals. So he talks Japanese as much as he can while he's over there. And he goes into a store, and he loves Japanese milk tea. So there's a story where he walks into a store, and he tries to order a milk tea, and he says the two words for milk and tea in Japan, thinking he's being all, see, I know what I'm doing. And he says milk tea in Japanese, and the store owner is like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, what? and then he points to what he wants on the wall, and the store owner goes, oh, milk tea? Yeah,
that's pretty good.
It's really freaking funny. So you see, that's just how translation and things work. Is sometimes proper noun get the proper term for something gets completely divorced from the original language. He literally said milk tea in their home language. They had no idea what he was asking for until he pointed to it, and they went milk tea.
Okay, so how does that relate to the argument of whether or not Friendship is Magic is an anime?
We're talking about etymology and how language moves across cultures. So
the proper nouns can transcend language and translation.
It's a similar concept. We have homily or whatever words where you have multiple words together create a different meaning than the words separately. Like rock and roll do not mean literally rocks and rolling them.
Oh, that's a great one. That's what I should have come up with. Instead of submarine, I should have done that.
It's a music genre that took multiple words, combined them together. Now we have a new meaning by combining those words together that only makes sense within a certain culture. You might have different terms elsewhere that have similar translations because the Western term got very popular. But if you went somewhere else and you tried to translate rock and roll directly into that language, it's not going to make any sense. And the term rock and roll, if you pull the words apart, still have their original meanings.
I think context plays a lot into that.
It does.
Because you could say rock, and if you just, you came up to me randomly on the street and said rock, I'm either going to, I'm like, okay, are you going to hit me with a rock? Or are you going to, or do you want me to play you some music? Because that word with no context can have multiple meanings. So DJ, I haven't heard from you in a little bit. What do you think about what Chuckly is saying?
I don't know. There's just something about this not clicking with me.
Well, can you put words to it? Because we're kind of in a debate here, and you're gonna.
It sounds like your personal opinion is getting in the way with facts and logic.
I don't know.
Okay, so let me take this then, because here's the thing. I definitely do not want Friendship is Magic to be associated with the degeneracy that is anime.
Don't worry, it's not.
So, but it sounds like we are in a transitional period of history where the etymology is coming full circle to mean multiple things in terms of, like, it used to mean all animation when it came to Japan, and then when it came back to America from Japanese animation came to America from Japan, then the word that got developed out of that became anime, and then some more American cartoons went back to Japan through syndication, and now they're calling that anime. So
no, they're just calling it animation in their home language.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not the same when we take we've been over this like twice.
Well,
that's just a translation issue. That they're not literally calling King of the Hill anime in Japan. They're just calling it an animation in their home language.
Okay. Let me give him another response. So some Dulcet Tone asked a while ago, and we'll go back to questions and stuff later on.
Yeah.
But he asked a while ago, does Western animation really try and muscle its way in to the definition of anime and try and include itself in the definition and take things over?
I'm going to say just from observation that it certainly has tried, because a lot of animes have proven to be wildly popular, and if you can jump on that bandwagon, you might get some of that extra viewership by association.
That is definitely true, and it's kind of up to each generation of anime fans to decide whether they're going to allow that or not.
Yeah.
The most recent offender, and I'm going to call them that, but things might change and they might be included in anime, has been Netflix and their Castlevania show, which I've watched the first season of. It is an incredible show. It is made in Texas.
It is.
It is not anime within any normal sense of the word, but if you showed it to any anime fan, you could very easily confuse a bunch of them and they would be convinced.
The same could be said for Ruby as well.
Yes, and there were a ton of people asking for the subs of Ruby at the time, and a lot of people were confused, and that is also, funnily enough, made in Texas. So it is up to each generation to kind of figure this out, and it's very possible that the generation could get more flexible because the quality, or at least the identity of these American Western-produced shows has gotten a lot closer to the identity of anime, and it might be more useful to discuss them together. And that is ultimately the test of these definitions, and the changing etymology is the discussion any good?
So let me ask you this.
It used to be that we needed to keep the discussion separate, but that might be changing.
If the times they are changing, I don't want to be the boomer standing in the way. I just want to get out in front of. It's not Western animation or Western fans suddenly trying to change or define the definition of anime to be really narrow. The definition of anime is multiple generations old. You could argue as old as the boomer generation because anime came over in the 60s. So the definition of anime is multiple generations old. So that's where the inertia is in favor of the strict definition of anime. And if the times they are changing, it's going to mold and develop into stuff that's just following that style. If we're going to switch from Scotch to a bourbon definition of anime, so be it. I can't stop the tide from changing. And that's how etymology works. Words change over time.
So,
which is the argument that DJ should have brought up. You're welcome, DJ. I'm making your case for you. If the times they are changing, so be it. But let's all just understand the etymology, which is multiple generations old, is the strict definition of animation coming specifically out of Japan. And we are now changing it. The other side are the ones that are making the new definition, which can happen, but it'll take time and large amount of adoption by large amount of fans. Like Chuckly said, lots of people adopting this.
So
like anime fans adopting it.
Here's a question that I want to ask, and you just gave me a great segue into it, because in recent years, Webster adjusted the definition of the word literally, because a lot of people were using...
Oh, this is a separate debate. This is a whole... Oh, I could do an hour on this.
Yeah.
My veins are popping right now.
I know, and it gets me fired up too. Believe me, I'm with you, Cordero, on this one. But to the people in the audience that don't know, Webster recently adjusted the definition of the word literally because people were misusing it so frequently when they had meant to say figuratively. Right, so now it also includes the definition of figuratively. So now literally and figuratively can be used interchangeably, and I think that's a horrible thing. So my question is to Chuckly, what is the importance of making...
I hate you.
This...
You went to Chuckly before me on purpose. you want me to sit here and stew on it.
What is the purpose of the gatekeeping, Chuckly? Why is it so important that we make this distinction?
Well, the criteria used earlier is you need to have good discussion. So language does change, and if they take away the word literally, then we're going to come up with some other way to say what we want. But we're also kind of going to be upset that they kind of took something away from us and kind of reduced the quality of discussion that we were having when we were trying to use literally in a literal sense. So the quality of discussion.
What do you mean by literal? Do you mean literal or figurative? I'm confused.
I mean both. No.
Oh, you're gonna make Cordero's head literally explode.
It's literally figuratively happening right now.
Thank you.
So go
I'm here all
ahead. Go ahead and finish your thought there, Chuckly.
That was finished. That was
okay.
finished.
So Cordero, I release your chains.
Okay, so here's why the literally thing is invalid based on everything we just said, because etymology can change words over time. Here's why for literally it's horseshit. Literally, has a definition that means literally, and figuratively means figuratively. First of all, those two function just fine and don't need to be changed. As far as people using literally when they actually mean figuratively, well, we have another word that's a modifier that explains that context, and that word is called hyperbole. So when somebody says, I'm going to literally explode, and in context they clearly mean figuratively, they were using the word literally hyperbolically. You don't need to add a second definition, because to be fair, the first definition of literally is still literally, and that's a secondary definition, could also mean figuratively. You don't need to add a secondary definition to literally to mean it can mean figuratively. All you have to do is say that people who use literally figuratively are saying literally hyperbolically. Problem solved!
All right.
Hyperbole is one of the tools that changes language over time.
Yeah.
And the thing that makes me really upset here is that I can't say literally anymore and mean what I meant to mean ages ago.
It's unfortunate.
Like it's now an ambiguous term, and it could mean almost anything, and that means that I have to come up with some other term and use that when other people don't know what that term is.
Which is a pain in the neck for you, because you take everything said literally anyway.
Yes, very much so.
Like when people are talking to you. You can't use metaphor or hyperbole at all with this guy. It goes right over his head. So
that varies.
Yeah.
I'm so mad at you. I'm gonna come to your house and stab you.
I mean,
what did I mean by that? I actually just meant, haha, we're joking around and having fun. But do we need to change the definition of stab to have a secondary definition that just means could also be joking? No, I was being hyperbolic in the moment. Do you see the problem here? Do you see the dilution of language? Like just because a term is being used hyperbolically in mass doesn't mean we need to change the definition of that word.
So
that's going to do a lot more damage to language than just mild etymology changes over time.
So
we have the word hyperbole for a reason. It's for this exact reason. So like if too many people are saying, I'm going to stab you for what you said, we don't need to go to the dictionary and say, well, stab could also mean just kidding. No, it's being hyperbole. It's being hyperbolic. It's being joking. We already have ways of dealing with that.
Okay, so
you don't have to change words.
What is the cultural damage if we start calling Western animation anime?
I don't know. It would be really confusing at anime conventions for like a decade. That's the fallout.
What we're talking about is two different cultures and the type of critique that we apply to the works based on those cultures. So we have a long history of anime in Japan, which is honestly very confusing in a lot of their shows. And the way that you understand these shows requires a very Japanese cultural lens to understand them. And most of the shows coming out from the US have their own layers of cultural understanding that requires that lens. Now they're blending together. And the blending together through culture and the wealth of anime fans that have grown up on anime means that we're getting a little bit closer where they can merge back together. But still, so many anime require still that cultural lens that if you try and merge them together too closely, you're going to lose that angle of critique.
It does make sense because there's multiple generations of anime fans who on the surface immediately catch Japanese cultural references because of the media they've consumed for a long time. But as Chuckly is saying, the danger of that is those cultural references that are put in anime, they're also cartoony. They're exaggerated. So there's a lot of people, and this is where like the weeb meme comes in, where weebs think, oh my god, I'm so Japanese because I watch all this anime. You have a cartoonish, childish understanding of Japanese culture that's been filtered through a creative lens. So there's a lot of people who think they understand Japanese culture because they get anime references, and so I think there's a danger that you get right there. Is blurring anime with Western fans. You could have this thing where like, oh god, I have to use the word, don't I? Cultural appropriation, where people are misunderstanding Japanese culture and basically only having a cartoonish understanding of it and really kind of perverting. And god, that really is the actual meaning of cultural appropriation, but it's so watered down and overused. But yeah, on its face, that's what that is. So I suppose that is kind of a danger of that. If you like anime, that's great. And if anime is a gateway to get you into Japanese culture, that's also great. But you should dive in and actually learn about IRL Japanese culture and see how that was cartoonified into the animation, rather than just taking the animation on its face and being like, that's Japanese culture, I can move to Japan now.
Okay, so here's a couple. I got a couple more questions I want to ask. First of all, DJ, what did you think about all that? Do you have any points against what they said?
No.
DJ is getting his butt kicked.
Really, I just did this. I did my take to be devil's advocate, because in the end, I really do not give a dang which one it's called. Because I'm going to call it that just to troll anime fans, since they can be the most annoying people on the internet.
Oh,
that's
thank you.
That's 100% acceptable.
I tried to get into anime clubs in college, and they were the worst people.
Yeah, you should have come with Batman the Animated Series and be like, that's my favorite anime.
Although I will say, I kind of lean that Castlevania's an anime.
All right.
I will lean hard on that one because it is a Japanese property.
So
they lean pretty heavily into the anime style. But it's
a Japanese property. It just happens to be made in Texas. Castlevania is a Japanese series.
It is a Japanese property, and that's another part of the thing that blurs it.
That's a really good segue into the next question that I wanted to ask, is if we go back to the champagne argument, how much of it needs to come from Japan to be an anime? So is it because something that Chuckly has said in the past is produced in Japan? So producing to someone with the word producing to someone with a film degree means a lot of things, because it can mean where did the money come from, or it could mean how much of the production was actually done in Japan, because what we know right now is a lot of production is getting shipped over to China and Korea and Thailand to save on costs. The money is probably coming from Japan. The voice actors may or may not be coming from Japan. So how much of it needs to be from Japan in order to be considered anime? Is it just the production? Is it just the voice actors? Is it just the writers? Or does it have to be 100%? You can't get made unless we can trace your lineage back to Sicily.
Funny.
The current method of handling this, and it hasn't necessarily caught on nearly as well as the term anime has, but it's the way it's being discussed currently, is you've got terms like hybrid productions, production companies, Western produced anime, and they've got their own specific names to help clarify where they belong in the genre, and that's kind of fine. But the rest of the fans aren't necessarily going to be using these specific terms when they discuss them. So you've got shows like Neo Yokio, which was written by a Westerner and was largely made in Japan and kind of produced in America. And that's kind of a hybrid production because the Western team gave the Japanese team a little bit more control over the creation of the show than you'd normally expect from a producer. They gave the team over there a bit more control in creating the show in terms of art and everything than, say, a big studio over here would, where they were just contracting them to do the art.
You know something, Chuckly? I was gonna give you a present, but then you went and mentioned Neo Yokio, and now you don't deserve this big Toblerone.
Oh, okay.
Cordero, what do you think about it? How much of the production needs to have come from Japan in order for it to be anime?
Okay, so traditionally people would have said 100%, but that's being debated now. But see, the thing with anime, and one thing that I think animes don't want to lose, is the reason that it was like, oh, it needs to 100% become from Japan, because in the past, in order to truly be an anime in the anime style, it needed to come from Japan directly to guarantee several things. And those things are that anime has a specific style, it has an animation style, it has a storytelling style, it has a story structure style. It's not specific to genre because animes of all genres have been created, but the storytelling, story structure style, character structure style is unique to anime, or the Japanese way of doing that. And also, just from a storytelling standpoint, Western stories and Eastern stories are constructed different. And I've watched a lot of videos and stuff. We could get into how Eastern and Western folklore different style, but animes follow the Eastern style of storytelling, which is very different from the Western style of storytelling. So I think if we're going to blur or change the etymology of anime, we need to define and keep a couple of things that make anime anime, and that's like the animation style, the cultural embedment of it being Japanese culture, the Eastern style of storytelling, the Eastern style of character construction and character models, and like all of that stuff needs to be present, I think, for something to be considered anime, and that could be a stand-in for it coming directly from Japan. So now, if a show is made in Texas or Canada, I'm almost done. If a show is made in Texas or Canada or wherever, but they follow all of those things, it's Japanese very culturally. It's the same animation style that people can recognize with their eyes immediately. It's that Eastern style of storytelling, or that anime style of storytelling that we know and love. I think we can start opening that definition up slowly, breaking those boundaries. But there's a risk of it being blurred and those Western influences coming in and watering down what made the anime style unique. Because Ruby, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Teen Titans, all of these shows that are anime inspired or anime like or similar, their animation style is close but not quite anime. They're more culturally Western than they are culturally Japanese. They have anime tropes in them, but they're more Western style stories and character tellings, and not Eastern style story and character tellings. Avatar: The Last Airbender, you can argue, is Eastern storytelling, but the point is that it's not that we don't want to call it anime, is that we don't want to lose all that totality of the quality of anime that we know and love that made us wanted to make animation to begin with. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
so the next question was how much tropes have to be in there, since you talked about tropes and checking those boxes, and that means if we check enough of those boxes, Friendship is Magic could be anime. Is something, because there's a lot of Netflix shows on right now where they came from Korea, or they came.
It's more the tropes.
Yeah, it's the
tropes is one facet.
But the tropes can be in the story, in the animation, in the directing, and
still be Western.
Exactly. So how about Korea? How about Thailand? How about China? Are those shows anime?
Well, based on what I was just talking about, they could be.
So, like I was saying beforehand, we've developed a lot of very specific terms for some of these alternate categories, and they're kind of still being adopted. If we're talking about Korean shows, they have their own kind of anime-sounding term for Korean manga, so for Korean comics and for Korean shows. Sometimes we just call them Korean anime. If we're talking about Korean comics, they're called manhwa, I believe.
Yes, that's right.
And they're similar for Chinese shows and so on, but they're kind of in the process of being adopted. It's kind of all blending together, and we're still figuring that out. And they might all just be anime in the future. We might adopt some other things in the future, but it's kind of in the process. And one thing that has allowed this term to stay so clearly defined for so long is the Japanese culture is incredibly resistant to influence from outside cultures in certain things. They generally want to do things their own way. Nintendo is absolutely famous for this, where they have their generation-old styles of business, and they just do things their own way. They're online their own way, and they don't take a lot of influence from everybody else.
Okay.
And in some things, people get really upset at them because of that. But in other things, they're like, all right, I'll stay with Nintendo till the end.
Okay, so we've gotta start wrapping things up here in the interest of time. Let's move on. Let's move on.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah, you got 10 seconds.
For Chuckly, yeah, the Western anime fandom feeling of trying to keep things as Japanese as possible is a trickle down from the Japanese tendency of keep things Japanese as possible. We became fans of this art that came from Japan, and because they like to keep it Japanese, we like to keep it Japanese. So that's where this sentiment comes from. So as long as we keep it very Japanese, I'm okay with the definition opening or the origin or the creation opening as long as we keep things Japanese, because that's the style we fell in love with.
Okay, so
agreed.
Let's move on to the audience participation segment, which is going to be very short tonight because we only have a little bit of time. DJ, pick one thing from the audience that you wanted to address.
Oh boy, it's all been going by so fast. Let's see.
While he's picking, Chuckly, pick something that you wanted to address from the audience.
So I kind of did mine earlier, when I addressed dulcet tones. I'm going to look for another one, but how about you pass it on while I'm doing that?
All right.
I do see one from Callback that could be good.
Tell me.
I was going to do Callback.
Callback, are we having the ship of Theseus argument regarding anime?
Can somebody explain that?
I can. DJ, do you know it? Because I can explain it, but I'll let you do it.
I remember it mostly because it was in WandaVision. It's how much of it remains as you replace it, I think it was.
Oh, so you've got the hammer idea?
Yes,
it's a good hammer.
No, yes, that's correct. It is
the handle. Is it still the same hammer?
Yeah, that's exactly the idea. The ship sailed from Theseus, and it sailed over the Mediterranean Sea. And over time, they board by board, they had to keep repairing and replacing part of the boat. So by the time it's at the end of its journey, every single piece of the ship of Theseus has been replaced. So is it still the ship of Theseus, or is it still the hammer? That's exactly correct. And yeah, we kind of are having that discussion for anime.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty then. So let's see here. Chuckly, did you find anything?
I got a question from user, very good name. What, in your opinion, fundamentally separates the show Friendship is Magic from the typical anime? What does it have in common? I kind of wanted to get to this discussion, but we didn't have much time, but I'll go over some really quick things.
Yeah, take 2 minutes right now.
All right. So I'm going to have a lot more fun with the comparisons, and then we can go to the contrasts. Friendship is Magic took a lot of ideas of Japanese cuteness from anime, where the old style,
eyes.
Old style of My Little Pony animation was made to look like babies.
And moe. It's literally a moe. That's what they were going for.
Japanese cuteness started off, one of the best examples, with Hello Kitty, where instead of making Hello Kitty look like a baby, what they did was they simplified it to the nth degree. Hello Kitty barely has a nose, if any, barely has a mouth, gigantic eyes, but it's a very, very simple design and very, very simple face. And if you look at the ponies and compare the old designs to the new ones, they have been drastically simplified so that it's not trying to look like a baby's face with it kind of like human face, but like simple features and that type of thing. The My Little Ponies designs are very, very simple relative to the old ones. And that makes it much easier for flash animation and stuff like that, I'm sure. But, okay, they took a lot of inspiration from Japanese sensibilities of cuteness and brought them over. They also took a lot of sensibilities for Japanese storytelling in sense of serialization of the story, where each episode ties into the other and you get actual character development, which is something that we hadn't had in American animation in a long time.
We have a
The
little bit
characters
of
grow.
continuity, but 90% of Friendship is Magic is standalone episodes like the like is pretty typical with us. Okay, so I'm gonna stop you there.
We got a lot more than we had in many series in time past.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you look at season by season, it's easier to notice rather than episode by episode.
Okay. Cordero, did you see anything from the audience?
Callback says that he wished he was on this episode. Buddy, I wish you were on this one too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was I'm sure he would have had some interesting takes on things. He's been around a little bit longer than we have.
I was gonna say he's been he was there in the before time.
Yep.
He was there when the magic was written, so we witches can't speak to him. I butchered that meme.
Alrighty then. So let's call it there with our few minutes left. Real quick, let's go down the line here. One thing we learned. DJ, what did you learn tonight?
Anime fans are still pretty easy to troll.
True.
Yep. Cordero, what did you learn tonight?
I learned. I actually kind of changed my opinion a little bit from what I came in with. Like, yeah, I learned that it's more important to keep it Japanese than it is to come from Japan itself, because it's a global world, and you can make what is Japan style pretty much anywhere in the world. So I might be okay with our Scotch anime becoming bourbon anime, but you better stick to those bourbon restrictions, or you can't put it on the label, and I will fight you.
All right. Chuckly, what did you learn tonight?
I had a lot of fun discussing the ideas of etymology with Anthony. Like, I know I drove a lot of that discussion, and I seemed like I was leading it sometimes, at least I think I did.
Yeah, I don't mind that.
But it definitely helped me understand what I was trying to think about, because that discussion helps a lot. So
You brought the talking points, I brought the passion.
yeah. And even if I had the talking points, I didn't necessarily have all of them before we started discussing it. You guys forced me to bring them out.
Yeah, it came out organically. I'm the one who brought up etymology. You're welcome, everyone.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Good job there.
Did I win the debate again? I feel pretty good.
Well, I set you up because I set up some talking points knowing you were going to bring up etymology.
Well, I changed my own mind, so that's a pretty big win.
Yep, that's
I win again.
To close off tonight, I'm going to quote the wise words of the great Hayao Miyazaki: "Anime was a mistake."
I think that's a Hitler quote, isn't it?
No, that's Hayao Miyazaki. All right.
I don't think it's a real quote, but
No, it is a real quote. It came from his own documentary. He's getting interviewed. He just talks. He mentions multiple times about how he hates anime fans and what anime has become.
Anime fans are trash. So
yeah, but now they work in anime and they make everything trash and perverted and tropey. And then we get
I heard that a lot of times it's taken out of context, but I didn't understand why.
The context is not far off from what I'm describing here. I'll show it to you after the stream. Thanks to everyone for coming out and tackling this cursed topic with us. We couldn't do it last debate because nobody showed up, and we almost didn't get to it tonight because my freaking internet stopped working, but we got through it.
And I think it was really good. This is one of the best Brony debates in a while, I think.
Yeah, maybe it probably was, even though we all technically agreed with each other. Zeus, if you're out there listening, I hope you enjoyed your topic suggestion. If you guys want to suggest topics, please feel free to do so through Twitter or at Brony Debates. I hope you all enjoyed listening. If you want to be on the show, I'd love to have you. Let's just get you on the Patreon for $1 a month, and then your suggestions become priority, and you can get on the show. You can also pick the games for Friday Night Fights. I'm very grateful to all of my supporters, especially on the $10 and up tier, including these two fools, DJ Skywalker and Pony Cordero, as well as Princess Heather Blossom, Shady Oak Ministry, Sid McConroy, Autoknight, Emerald Spencer, Son Girder, Senko, Kyle Christensen, Stephen A. Wilson, Rein-Kun, Princess Sunshine Sparkle, QFlash, and Dark Malcontent, author of the Metaverse series. Check out all their stuff in the description, and I hope to see you all on the next one. Say goodnight, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, anime fans.
Prost.
Good night, everybody.